Hello, everyone. My name is D1, and my primary occupation is being a man of God. But on the side, I'm a rapper, I'm a public speaker, an author, and a college professor. But I'm here to deliver the verse of the day today, and I love me a straightforward scripture. It's Leviticus chapter 20, verse 26. It says, "You must be holy, because I, the Lord, am holy. I have set you apart from all other people to be my very own." Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, no culture should come before kingdom culture. Our ties to the music of the times and the politics and the social economic status of
Mr. Larry, how are you, sir?
All right, tonight I would like to start out with just a quick video that my wife shared with me the other night. It's from the YouVersion app of the Bible. They send out these videos for like video of the day, I think. Anyway, this video talks about a concept called kingdom culture. It's pretty short. Hopefully you'll be able to understand the dude. Slightly different accent than you West Tennesseans. But anyway, I thought this might be a good mindset check. Just to kind of put us in a good spot to talk about the spiritual gift of service tonight. So, Alan.
Hello, everyone. My name is D1, and my primary occupation is being a man of God. But on the side, I'm a rapper, I'm a public speaker, an author, and a college professor. But I'm here to deliver the verse of the day today, and I love me a straightforward scripture. It's Leviticus chapter 20, verse 26. It says, "You must be holy, because I, the Lord, am holy. I have set you apart from all other people to be my very own." Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, no culture should come before kingdom culture. Our ties to the music of the times and the politics and the social economic status of it all takes a back seat to kingdom culture because we were called to be holy. That means that we should shine our light according to how God wants us to shine it. Not to say, well, I don't want to offend anyone and I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. That's the problem, is we'll be trying to ingratiate ourselves into the culture that is popular at the moment as opposed to the culture that is present eternally, which is kingdom culture. We just have to simply know and understand that in this scripture, God has called us to be set apart, to be holy, because He is who we represent. So when people be like, oh, who you with? Or who that person rolling with? They got to know, oh, that's one of God's children right there. Therefore, since they know that we God's people, our character has to represent the God that we serve. And guess what? We got a lifetime to do it, starting today. Let's get it.
So if you didn't like that, that's Molly's fault. No, I'm just kidding. But no.
Hello, everyone. My name is D1, and my primary occupation is being a man of God.
All right.
But on the side.
No, in all seriousness, I love that term he used, kingdom culture. That really does kind of explain a lot. And I love the part where he says, if we don't love the people who He has redeemed, then how can we say that we actually love Jesus? That's a very true statement. So tonight, as we look at spiritual gifts, we're going to look at a few scriptures, and I passed around some Post-its. So when we get to those, and I call it out, raise your hand so John can find you real quick. So we're going to look through the scripture, and then we'll end the devotional part of the speech, and then we'll kind of move on to something else, I guess, as it were. But anyway, so I wanted to look at the importance of serving others as a spiritual gift, and also the call for believers to use their gifts to build up the church for His glory. So let's start with Romans 12. So who has that one? So David. And I think Alan will have them up on the PowerPoint as well.
Romans 12, verses 6 through 8. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. The one who teaches in his teaching. The one who exhorts in his exhortations. The one who contributes in generosity. The one who leads with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness.
Okay, who has 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 10? Is that you, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are diversities of ministrations, and the same Lord. And there are diversities of workings, but the same God who worketh all things in all. But to each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit to profit withal. For to one is given through the Spirit, the word of wisdom, and to another word of knowledge, according to the same Spirit, to another faith, and the same Spirit, and to another gift of healings, and the one Spirit, and to another workings of miracles, and to another prophecy, and to another discerning of spirits, to another divers kinds of tongues, and to another the interpretation of tongues.
Okay, Galatians 5:13, Mark. Then who has 1 Peter 4? Okay. So Galatians chapter 5, verse 13.
You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love.
Okay, in 1 Peter 4, verses 10 and 11.
As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen.
Okay, who has Ephesians 4? So Regina, and then who has Mark 10? Mark 10, 45? Well, I guess I will. All right, Regina.
Now these are the gifts Christ gave to the church: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ.
Okay, in Mark 10, 45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Who has Colossians 3, 23? JT? How did you get it? Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean it to sound that way. It was just kind of a surprise. So Colossians 3.
Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ.
Okay, so what did all these passages have in common, James? Service. Great. What else?
Some of what you said about gifts being used to build up the church, to build up each other. And that's it talks a lot about service as a gift and then using that gift to build up the church and build up other people.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of just take kind of a sidetrack here for a second. I travel several hours a week, sometimes more than others. And so, like many of you, I listen to podcasts, audiobooks, things like that, try to make my brain grow a little bit. One of the recent sessions that I listened to on a trip to Alabama was from a podcast from Simon Sinek. Does anybody know him? Okay, so he's more of a thought leader on management and leadership skills. So he discusses that, and interestingly enough, in this podcast on this day while I was traveling down, he actually had a guy from a nonprofit organization on his podcast kind of telling his story, which I thought was really cool. So where this meets our topic for tonight, hopefully will make sense in a few minutes, and if not, great, you heard a cool story. But this podcast story is about a dude named Scott. So the way that Scott explains his life and this nonprofit that he started, he does it in 3 acts, or what he calls acts. So he's kind of a theatrical dude, if you know what I mean. So Act 1, Scott was actually raised in Philadelphia. I did not mean that, though. Scott was raised in Philadelphia, so he was a single child in a middle-class home. Family was Protestant, went to church. He was a believer, knew the Bible. Dad was a salesman. Mom was a literature person. I don't know what that means, but that's what he says. And during this point in his time, around the age 4, he suffered what he termed a formidable trauma in their house. So basically, that just means it's something that was traumatic that happened to him that kind of put the trajectory of his life in place. Okay? So what this was over a period of months, his house was flooded with carbon monoxide, and they did not know until one day they came in and his mom was passed out on the floor. So the whole family suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning, but his mom took the brunt of it. And she had so much in her blood, they basically had to give her transfusions until the point that she no longer had it. However, she had long-term damage and basically became invalid, and from that point forward lived a life of isolation from the rest of the family. And again, Scott being an only child, 4 years old. So his superhero mom went from being that to being sick all the time and absent from his family. So what ended up being the result of the carbon monoxide poisoning? Basically, she became allergic to everything. So any fumes, smells, and all of the things. So even her sheets on her bed, they had to wash 25 times in baking soda before she could have it. Otherwise, she'd have an allergic reaction. Again, she was a literary person. She couldn't read books anymore. They'd have to bake them in the oven to hopefully get the fumes from the ink just from a book to settle down enough so that she could read a book. So pretty stressful, traumatic thing. But needless to say, this had an impact on Scott's life, even at that age. So he, at the age of 4, decided, I'm going to become a doctor so that I can help my mom and one day cure her. So that's kind of act 1 of Scott's life. However, before Scott even finished college, his mom passed away, which starts act 2 of his life. So at that point in time, Scott decided, in so many words, to sow his wild oats. He basically turned away from the church, left his faith, and decided to do all the things a good Christian shouldn't. His words, get drunk, have sex, and party all the time. So in fact, he made this such a priority in his life. He left Philadelphia, moved to New York, and decided he wanted a Rolex, a fancy car, and date supermodels. Those were his 3 life goals at that point in time. To do all of this, he became a nightclub promoter. So Scott climbed the New York social ladder and actually became one of the top 8 nightclub promoters in all of New York. So for a decade, Scott took so many uppers and downers just to stay in the scene overnight, as much as he was doing, until essentially his body collapsed on him one day. And as with any near-death experience, as many of us would have or think about, Scott at that point took stock in his life. So he had a watch, he had the car he wanted, but he was single-handedly responsible for getting thousands of people high and drunk every week. So awesome legacy. So he was not the doctor or someone who helped anyone at all. So Scott decided to do something about it, and this brings on Act 3 of his life. So Scott turned back to his faith, started going to church, moved back to Philadelphia, and then decided, instead of giving his money away that he had gotten, his ill-gotten gains, as he called them, he decided to give 1/10 of the time that he had spent during that phase of his life to doing good and helping other people. So if you remember, that was a decade, so 1 year of time is what he said he was going to dedicate, because he was going to tithe. Protestant, that was kind of their thing to do. So 1 year he was going to give for the decade he spent in what he called debauchery, which is only the second time in my life I've ever heard that word used in the correct sense, I think. But anyway, and I'm not going to explain it. So from that point, Scott applied to every major nonprofit of the day. So this would have been around the late 90s, so this would have been UNICEF, Oxfam, and everything else. He actually applied to about 40 different places. And surprisingly enough, there weren't many openings for nightclub promoters in the realm of international organizations that help people. But to make a long story short, after a few dozen failed attempts, Scott was accepted by an organization called Mercy Ships. Has anybody ever heard of that? So their deal is they sell a ship over to Africa, they land at a port, they, for a week, will operate on about 1,500 people. They get up, move, go somewhere else, and do that for a season. So he was accepted to Mercy Ships, but these were the conditions. So again, if you remember, he was a nightclub promoter, so not a lot of skills as being a doctor, but he could write. He learned that from his mom, and then being a nightclub promoter, he knew how to market things. So he had a decent digital camera. So basically, they told him, hey, you can come take pictures and help us document what we do, and we'll take you with us. So the first condition is, yeah, we'll give you a job. The second condition was he had to pay them $500 a month to do this. And he still chose to do it. So in 2004, he left for Liberia. And at that point, learned where Liberia actually was before going. And if you don't know, it's on the west coast, about midway down in Africa. So he left to go take photos and promote the work that Mercy Ships did. And he ended up doing this for 5 years. So we're not going to get into all the experiences that he had, but if you have time to go back and listen to that podcast, he gives another 15 minutes or so of just talking about some of the heart-wrenching conditions and things that he saw while he was there and was documenting for Mercy Ships. But throughout those experiences, let's say, 1,500 people were operated on. There were 5,000 people that were waiting there at a time to be helped. The other 3,500 were just turned away. And as he kind of went out to some of these villages and started looking at their conditions, one thing he noticed that was in common was they all had dirty water. And then as he came back and started talking to the Mercy Ship doctors, and they're like, yeah, we know. He's like, but, don't you realize, like, half of these people, if they just had clean water, wouldn't be standing out here to come in to have surgery. The disease and the sickness has come from the dirty water. So most of the surgeries that he saw performed during that 5 years, he attributed to the dirty water. So Scott decided to help others after that 5-year stint, using what he termed, and I love this term, he called it radical obedience to James chapter 1, verse 27. And that reads, "Pure and undefiled religion before God and Father is this, to look after the orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." So Scott decided, I'm going to help these people. So over the next few years, Scott Harrison answered the call to service and started the organization Charity Water. It inspired others to help. He actually inspired others to help his cause, and over the last, 17 to 18 years, they've provided clean water to over 300 million people in Africa and around the world. So basically, 300 million is what percentage of people in the world globally? They changed this from like 1 out of every 10 people having dirty water to 1 every 8 people having dirty water. So small impact overall, about 3% impact, but all in all, still a good thing. So this brings us back to service. And this is where I'm going to start asking questions, and you're going to start talking, and John's going to run around with the microphone. So how many of us would tithe our lives to service? Tithe, T-I-T-H-E. I see no hands. Elaborate on what you mean by that. Okay, going back to the example of Scott. I'm 40-ish, okay? So if I decided to tithe that means I'm going to spend 4 years of service helping people. I'm going to leave what I know, and I'm going to serve. That's what I mean by that. Now you get to talk, Kristen. She just wanted me to clarify. So how many of us in this room would do something like that, or any significant portion of time? Okay, I think it'd be tough to do it in a row. That makes sense. So let's talk about a year. A year is what, 5.5-ish, 5.6, 5.7 weeks? Could we do that much consecutively at one time? Take off a month and a week or so? Man, y'all are nitpicking. I'm just saying service.
When I was looking at my career choice as a Christian, I changed what I was going to do. I was thinking I really wanted to be an interior designer. And then I thought, well, nothing against people who do that, but that's not a great service. So I ended up being a teacher.
Okay.
So in a way, that's what I do every day or every weekday, even though I get paid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's fair. Anybody else? I'm only a quarter of the way there, so I'm not up here preaching at y'all.
Those people that foster or adopt, would that not be a good example of this?
Those people that have children in general, would that not be a good example of this? Yeah, that's fair, yes. I'm just saying service. I didn't say what kind of service. I'm just asking. And to be fair, all right, I think the tithing thing is tripping some people up. A large percentage of your time. Let's say it that way.
Actually, most of mine that I was actually doing, I've done things off and on like most of the people here at some point that's been beneficial. But as far as the real service time happened after I retired. I did do, for about 3 years, I helped with the Wounded Warrior program and helped veterans that had been injured in Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth to do it. Most of mine was through a hunting program where I take the guys that were handicapped out and put them on a stand and let them have a chance to get a deer. Then after that, I started working, and I adjust some of what you here know, I adjust my year so I get my medical stuff and family stuff and Strawberry Festival stuff out of the way the first half of the year, because the second half of the year I have set aside so that I can do mission work.
Cool. So I guess another, hands galore. Let's go James and then Molly.
So I think that I get the point of this.
What is it?
I live however I want to live, do whatever I want to do for a certain amount of time, and then take a tenth of that and serve others.
No, that was Scott's point. That's not my point.
Right.
Yeah.
That is his point.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what how a Christian ought to do.
That's fair.
I think, we talked about kingdom culture at the beginning, and service is a lifestyle choice every day, not just a percentage of our life.
Absolutely. I think for me, though, what helps me from that, I agree with you 100%. It's a lifestyle, it's a choice, it's a daily walk. But for me, if I'm sitting, and we're all bean counters to some degree, right? We always take note of numbers. If I'm trying to figure out that, I don't think there's any harm in doing that. I think that's a me personality thing. But I think in the situation of Scott, I heard a little bit more of the podcast than what I presented. I don't think that was his overall view of it. It was, that's what I did, and man, I really got to make up for that. So this is how he decided to do that. So I did want to clear up the air on that.
Okay, so my mind went where James went, and I wonder if part of why this question and this conversation is a little baffling to a lot of us is maybe while we say we live or we strive to live kingdom culture, maybe the reality is we are compartmentalizing our service more than we think or we wish or we hope we are.
Yeah. And I think where I want to go with that is, what are we calling service? I didn't define that intentionally on purpose. Ms. Brenda.
My question is, would caregiving be a service? Because if you give up time for your parent, you have to take care of your parent, there's no pay in that. You're giving up your time to care for someone. That's service in itself. I can say that because I had to leave here and go to Nebraska for 9 years to care for my younger sister that had Alzheimer's disease. But there are other people that are taking up just caring for their parent, I see that as service in itself, because that's a job.
I hear you. And not to compare, like this afternoon, I left work early to go get my kids to take them to tennis to sit on a really hard bleacher for 3 hours. Some people might view that as service. I'm doing that for my child, Do I have to do that for my child? Is it expected? They expect me to do that, but that's a whole different story. I think there was a hand over here, and then go back to Dr. Robertson.
I was going to say, I think it's easy for us with money.
Yes.
Because we look, you know, am I giving 10%? And so we have a conversation. Well, how much are we making? You know, I looked at my taxes. Are we doing 10%? What do we need to do to, you know, to at least give that? And so I think that's easy mathematically. But I think the principle is the same with our service, that, you know, with your spouse or with your family. Do you stop and go, hey, what are we doing to give back? What are we helping with? What is an area, you know, at church we can help with? You know, I think it's one of those things. Are we growing in that? Like, if we're having to stop and measure it all the time, I think we may be missing the point, unless we're using that as a benchmark, for lack of a better word, to how can I improve in that area. And I would just say, like, you know, everybody could probably use their mom, but, you know, my mother, and growing up, you know, going to nursing homes, and like, why would you take 3 little boys to a nursing home? And I'm not talking about a retirement home, I'm talking about a nursing home. And like things that my mother has always done that are just second nature to her, I'm so thankful for, because I've learned so much just in that everything you do every day, how you treat people, your attitude, you know, can be an act of service. How you treat your spouse, how you treat your kids, you know, how you just interact with people. And so seeing somebody who just constantly gives of themselves in different ways, I think that's where I want to be. That's what I want to model. And so I think it's like a lot of these other things we've talked about. Am I growing in that?
While John's walking over there, I just want to comment. I appreciate all the comments so far. Michael is not here to say tithe, okay? Just to clear that up. But yes.
My point is just to say that when we're talking about these acts of service, I think the purpose of the service matters. There are people that don't believe in God that go to their kids' ball games, that do acts of service, that work as nurses, that take care of their family when they need it. They're not necessarily doing the type of service that we're talking about here.
Correct.
To kind of tie up what we're talking about and with what Kristen just said, I thought of Ephesians 5. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. That's service. Husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church. That's service. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. That's service. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. That's service. And then it used the term slaves, but employees, obey your bosses with fear and respect, just with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. That's service. And that ties to what Christmas says, because every one of these says, do it as you're doing it unto the Lord. You know, I love my wife, but I love her because that's part of my service to the Lord. I raise my children the way I do because that's part of my service to the Lord. And all of these things fit that. And you're right, the purpose is what matters, is to build up the Lord, is to serve the Lord, is to bring glory to the Lord, to build up the church. So, cool. I'm just saying we don't need to be separating. You know, we say, well, I want to, every part of our life is part of our service. So, and by that context, we don't tithe it, it's all of it. It's 100%. So.
Yeah, and Molly, was this Rick Janelle that used to say the dismissal part, like you are dismissed to service, or was that? I don't remember. One of the preacher where she grew up with, I think that was his saying. When they said the final prayer, he would always say, "You're dismissed to service," and I love that mindset. That kind of goes along with what I think you're saying. Any other comments? JT? It will be?
Where my mind went on this idea of, giving a specific amount of our lives to service is this phenomenon that I found out about recently, where people who are already leading relatively active lifestyles and they decide they want to be healthier, so they start going to the gym first thing every morning, a lot of times will start gaining weight because they go to the gym and they think, I've already done everything I need, and they stop doing the things they were already doing. They don't take their dog for a walk. They don't play catch with their kids. And so it becomes this mindset of, I'm crossing it off a list. It's my to-do list. And if we start treating service like an action, and I don't think that's where you were going, but I think it's a mindset.
No, I appreciate you acknowledging that.
I think it's a mindset we need to be aware of, that if we say, it's not a bad thing to say, I'm going to do one good thing for someone today.
Yeah.
It's a bad thing when we take that mindset and say, I've already done my one good thing, so if someone else is in need, I'm not going to help them out. And so if we start looking at service as a lifestyle instead of an action, which is something that James brought up, then it takes us to a place where we've never done enough service for the day. And that's why, and to take it back to the example I gave earlier, that's why dieting is really unhealthy, because you get to the end of the diet and then you just go back to what you were doing before. What's healthier is changing your lifestyle habits, changing your relationship with food and exercise. And it's a principle that Jesus embodies in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, all right, you've all done a great job not murdering anyone. Who all of you hated this week? Let's take that kind of checklist mentality and let's get down to where your emotions are, where things are really going wrong.
Yeah, so, we don't need to get caught up in the quantity, but rather think more about the quality of our service. Absolutely. Anyone else? Cool. I have no idea where I want to go from here. Well, being a software engineer, every once in a while, I guess I get my literary feels on. So I'm going to quote an author, which is not my personality type. But Tolstoy, I found this to be an interesting quote. I'd heard it before and thought I would toss it in here somewhere. It seems appropriate now. The sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. So I think that's probably a good mindset to have with kind of what we're talking about. All right, so just to kind of slightly shift just a little bit, since Nathan brought this up and into it, are service and giving connected? And if I'm stepping on whoever did giving's toes, sorry. That's next week. Great. Let's not talk about that, maybe? I don't. True. All right, so are they connected? And if so, how? Somebody want to talk about that? Are service and giving connected? And if so, how are they connected? I'm the teacher, I ask the questions, so. JT? And then I think Nathan. Sorry, John. I guess JT couldn't have technically seen Nathan, so my bad.
I'm willing to wait. I've been the one running the mic before. I'm looking at this from the perspective of giving as in the contribution, which I know is not the extent of the giving that we're called to. But if we think about it that way, I have always worked under the idea that the contribution on Sunday morning is symbolic. We are, it's doing a good work. We are giving to the church. We're supporting missionaries. But at the end of the day, when we put in however much of our income on Sunday morning, that's a way of saying to God, I'm giving everything back to you. Here's part of it. And we take that mentality of the giving into our lives and give our time, give our resources, give our mindsets to God. And service is an integral part of that. You're giving energy, you're giving time that you could be spending doing things that you might want to do more. And so for me, giving and service, I'm not going to say they're the same thing, but they're very closely related because if you extrapolate it out, what is service but giving in a different form, I guess?
Okay. I'll come back to a thought on that after Nathan. You got to wait on the mic, bro.
So while I think giving our money is important, I think sometimes if we're not careful, that we give our money and we think we're good, whereas some people can give more money than others. And then obviously there's a story in the Bible about a woman who gave all she had. But service is something everybody can do, that it doesn't matter how much money you're bringing in. And so I wonder as we teach our children, as we work with our families, are we teaching, while we should talk about, I think, what we're giving or why that's important, are we teaching that in our everyday service as well? Sometimes we say things like, this generation, in talking about younger people, don't understand service. I would disagree with that some, but I would say, why is that? Have we taught them, and have we modeled that? And I think if we're not careful, they see service as work. And they're two different things to me. They could be intertwined, but I think service is not just something we make an appointment to go do. Yeah. It's part of our everyday lives, and until we look at it that way and work on it like we do working on peace or controlling our anger or those things, then it's just an occasional event and not a part of who we are.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. I want to kind of go back to the mindset component of that. And to make a comment on something you said, I think sometimes the definition and the way we think about it may be generational. Like, I think of how I was raised and my parents. It definitely is it's work. Service is work. I think about how my kid interacts with me about that, and they look at me like, it's just the right thing to do. What's your problem? So I do think there's societal shifts that are maybe generational with that and how people look at it. But to tie back to maybe what JT started with, let's talk about the mindset. And I think that goes back to value. So what do you guys value in your life? Like right now, if you're just taking stock and thinking through all the things that are important to you, what do you value most? Our relationship with God. That's a good answer. What else? Time? Okay. What else? Family. Did you say Coke? What? Food? Okay. What else? Freedom to worship. Yeah, freedom in general. I don't like anybody telling me what to do. David? Church family, our extended family, nuclear family, all the families. What else? Sometimes we value our stuff. So let's look at Luke chapter 12, verse 34. Or if you're so inclined, Matthew 6, verse 21. If I could get a volunteer to read that for me, please. I think Kevin's on the attack here. Luke 12, 34 is fine.
Working on it.
No problem. Luke 12.
Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be.
Okay, for where our treasure is, our heart will be there too. What do we treasure? What do we value? So we kind of talked about all those things. For me, just on a personal level, it's my time. I have told people before, I don't have enough time to fill out that invoice for you to pay me because it is not worth my time. I strongly value my time more than anything else. I value my time with my kids, my wife, my family, my church, my friends. I value my time because time equals what? Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, it's more about my time because I can replace that money in a different way, but I can't replace that time. And as I've gotten older, tick-tock, tick-tock, I feel it, man. I feel it every week now. That mortality symptom is kicking in. So my time, for me, is the most valuable thing. What about you guys? What's your treasure? To put that in a different way, but meaning the same thing. Just want to see if I get any different answers. What's your treasure? Jesus. The reward of heaven. Relationships. So back to serving and giving. So when we're serving people, or we're giving, or we're giving our time, our energy, our efforts. We're giving money. We're giving food, whatever that may be. When we do that, are we giving away our treasures? What's more important to us when we serve, or are we giving our leftovers? Somberness kicks in. Let's look at Romans 12, verse 11. And James, if you could read that for me, please. Romans 12, verse 11.
Do not be slothful in zeal, but be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord.
Okay, so serve the Lord. Have joy in service. Do not be afraid of work with no end. That's kind of a comment that I've heard before that I really didn't know what it meant 20 years ago. I kind of understand it a little bit more now. So don't be afraid with work. Don't be afraid of work with no end. I think if we really thought about it, our service, how many people need help, people that we can meet their needs, it almost feels endless at points in time, right? So don't be afraid of work with no end. And let's propagate kingdom culture as we use our gift of service to love on God's people. So thank you.